course, who does not want to learn more about starships from the legendary Star Trek universe? But what better way to do it than in a video that is over 1 hour long? Welcome to Trek Central's Star Trek Explained Hour video, where we dive into some of the best starships from the Star Trek universe. We've cut out all the sponsor ad segments, as well as any bits that are not relevant, so you can enjoy the most Star Trek lore at your own pleasure. There's also video chapters if you want to skip ahead. If you'd like to see more of this, let us know in the comments. Okay? Engage. Who would have thought that a Star Trek video game ship from 2001 would be making an appearance in 2024? Not us, but yes, the Achilles-class Starship has made a brand new debut appearance in Star Trek Online. The new Heritage Bundle introduces the Achilles Miracle Worker Heavy Destroyer. What do we know about the Achilles-class? Why is the ship so powerful that Starfleet just had to put it into service? Today we're talking about a ship that made its debut appearance in a 2001 PC game called Star Trek Deep Space Nine Dominion Wars. The Achilles-class, a torpedo gunboat that could give the versatile Akira-class a run for her money. Prepare for warp as we're diving into the deep lore and technical details of this formidable Starfleet Starship class. We previously did a video on the Achilles-class around 2 years ago, but much like Starfleet, it's time to warp back to where it began, give it a fresh lick of paint, and call it a refit. So yes, here we go again. The Achilles-class is a strategic heavy cruiser, developed specifically by the Federation and launched in 2373, non-canonically of course, in response to ships built by the Dominion such as the Jem'Hadar battleships and the Cardassian Hutet-class starship. The battleships, as we know from the Deep Space Nine episode of Valiant, are 2 times the size of the Galaxy-class starship, and 3 times the armaments. If you've not seen or played the game, here's a quick clip to give you an idea of what a Galaxy-class looks like compared to the Cardassian-designed Hutet-class, which appears to be even bigger than the battleship. Just a quick disclaimer to ensure we're all on the same deck, when we say the Achilles is non-canon, that is because it was introduced in a video game. Star Trek canon is sometimes a headache, but it means that if it was introduced in a game, then it is sadly not canon. Only things introduced by the TV and movies, i.e. seen on screen, are canon in the eyes of Trek. So yeah, it's also up to your personal headcanon. I like to imagine Starfleet maybe had a prototype Achilles class. You know what, while looking at the ship class, I could sort of see it evolving into the Inquiry class we see in Star Trek Picard. Let me know what you think, we've got more on this in a second. The idea behind the Achilles was the realization that to end the war would be to shut down the Ketracel White facilities in the Alpha Quadrant. Without them, the Jem'Hadar would die. The Federation and the Klingons greatly lacked the heavy ships capable of accomplishing such a mission. Limited to Galaxy and Negvar ships, which were already greatly overstretched in their respective battle groups, and the Sovereign was still in early life and not yet in wide-scale deployment. The further issue the Federation had during the Dominion War was also being spread far too thin, defending its own borders and keeping an eye on the Romulan border, making Starfleet aware they had far too many obligations and too few resources. Other forces, such as the Defiant, lacked the long-term operational range and sufficient numbers. The Akira class, whilst it had more than enough firepower, was still a fragile ship by itself. A new ship was needed. To exploit the Achilles heel, from which the class name was derived, a ship that would combine the agility, firepower, and range to accomplish the goal, without compromising on a crew's necessities, or current battle groups by diminishing numbers. Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards fulfilled the challenge of not only designing an entirely new class, but had it built and launched in under 2 years. These guys are quick. Achilles is easier and faster to construct than the equally capable, yet much larger, Galaxy and Sovereign class. Specified as a long-range, multi-purpose and hard-hitting heavy cruiser, capable of strategic strikes, with little to no escort, similar to the Prometheus class. What is it with Starfleet giving us these really cool ships and we never see them again? I mean, seriously. The designs follow the lineage of the Intrepid and Sovereign classes, being that the primary hull and engineering sections are directly connected, with no neck weakness, as seen on many previous starships. The nacelles are in line with the saucer section, keeping the profile streamlined from most angles. With a size of 612 meters long, 272 meters wide, and 67 meters high, it was divided into 14 decks. Small and sleek, the Achilles was a far cry from the supersized Dominion ships. However, it was equipped with systems originally intended for the Defiant. Given the massive issues the Defiant had during its development, it was easy to see why they held back on them and put them for use in a larger warship. Other tech included adapting existing anti-Borg technology, such as the pulse cannons and Class 1 ablative hull armor, new retro thrusters for hero maneuverability, and redundant warp and impulse systems, allowing for heavier damage and still being able to retreat to safe harbor should primary systems fail. It also has an unsupported self-service range of a Galaxy class, a long-range attack roll, and the firepower of the Sovereign, all of which is beneficial to operate effectively behind Dominion enemy lines. Boasting 8 pulse phaser cannons, 4 Type 12 phaser arrays, 2 quantum/photon torpedo launchers, and 8 quantum micro torpedo launchers, it was a beast, the latter of which is a prototype phalanx array mounted along the spine of the hull, covering the entire dorsal range of the ship. It's giving it a unique firing arc for torpedoes during an attack run, avoiding the need to fly directly at or away from enemy vessels, which proved extremely effective in making short work of Hutet-class ships. The array allows a ship to combat multiple enemies, whilst focusing forward weapons on a single target. Star Trek Online lists the phaser hexacannons as a prototype design. These build upon the original concept for the USS Defiant's phase quad cannons. The hexacannons fire even more bursts of heavy damage than the original quad version. Meanwhile, the micro quantum torpedo array allowed the ship to launch a massive number of micro torpedoes that made landing consecutive hits a serious threat. These torpedoes are mounted on the spine of a ship, allowing the torpedoes to launch upwards and then turn towards their targets. The prototype Achilles-class deployed for field testing performed extremely well, destroying 2 key facilities within a single mission behind enemy lines. It also accounted for 2 full Cardassian attack wings as well as nearly 20 Jem'Hadar strike cruisers, the best record for any single ship that participated during the war. However successful, a number of problems were identified when the Achilles returned to Utopia Planitia following the war's conclusion for refitting. The remainder of the hull was outfitted with non-warfare facilities that would have been standard on any other Starfleet design, such as science labs, holodecks, and ship-wide holo emitters. She was retasked with system patrols and deep space exploration, then moved out to further field testing, closing in 2375. Okay, time for a little Star Trek theory. We know how anyone that has anything to do with anything Trek ever has the need, the right, and the thrill of creating something new for not only themselves, but the fans too. The Achilles is no doubt built with the sole purpose of being an anti-Dominion type class. Therefore, introducing it into the game aptly named Dominion Wars was the time to do so. So, why didn't we see it in the series, or even another type of anti-Dominion ship with these types of abilities? Sure, the Deep Space Nine series had already ended, and the game would have been out for another 2 years following a finale. But not only was the ship larger and as agile as the Defiant, she was clearly better equipped to single-handedly blindside an unsuspecting opponent of massive proportions, where the Defiant-class USS Valiant failed abysmally against the same ships the Achilles was built to fight. True, she was manned by a crew of Red Squad cadets, but still it wasn't up to the job herself. With that in mind, the series creators likely did not want to overshadow the hero class of the series and make its role redundant, possibly why another Greek named Starship, the USS Prometheus, was introduced later in Star Trek Voyager. Maybe in universe it was inspired by the Achilles, which by the Deep Space Nine novel, The Long Mirage, was still in service by the 2380s. Then, for the game, the Achilles was inspired by the Prometheus, going by their respective release dates. But it's all just an idea, it's fun to think about. The Achilles is an overpowered ship for a Star Trek game, but such a ship may be toned down, could make it on screen. One of the main similarities with this ship, compared to new ships in shows such as Star Trek Picard, is the Achilles deflector dish, which is remarkably similar to the deflector grille seen on the Inquiry class. As I mentioned earlier, I can see how the Achilles class could evolve into the Inquiry class. That's rather than going back to Utopia, which you know would have been destroyed in the 2380s, it rather went off to another shipyard elsewhere, which would produce the Inquiry class starships later on. Just a thought. We've also recently seen ships from games, such as Star Trek Online, appear in the shows, with Star Trek Picard Season 2 having the Ross, Reliant, Gagarin, and Sutherland class appearing. In Season 3 of Picard, many Star Trek Online ships once again appeared on screen, including the Pathfinder class taking the role of the USS Voyager B. Obviously this can work a little easier for Star Trek Online due to the high details of the ship models. Even they need to be upgraded to have a visual accuracy to match the shows. It would be great if future Star Trek productions could also include these iconic ships, like the Achilles, Typhon, and Premonition-class. Speaking of those other ships, don't worry, we'll have videos on those soon. The Constitution-class is the pride of Starfleet. The original Constitution-class heavy cruiser was the premier frontline Starfleet vessel during the mid-23rd century. Eventually, as technology moved on, the Constitution-class would be phased out, and the legacy of the ship class would live well into the 31st century. Even in the 25th century, you would still see a Constitution-class around in a new design. In today's video, we look at every Constitution-class starship and class design within the Star Trek universe. You'd better put seatbelts on those bridge chairs, as this is diving deep into Star Trek lore. In the mid-23rd century, Starfleet commissioned and launched 12 Constitution-class starships. Construction of these ships occurred at Earth's San Francisco Fleet Yards, California, and at Luna's Tranquility Base. The USS Enterprise, USS Constellation, and USS Cayuga were all launched in 2245. The Enterprise was placed under the command of Captain Robert April. The Constitution-class was designed for exploration, patrol, and defense missions. However, their design allowed them to be outfitted with the latest technology when and where needed. By the early 2250s, the Constitution-class ships were considered the pride of Starfleet exploration missions and a premier vessel. Typically, these ships were attached to the front lines of Federation space for patrol and exploration of uncharted areas just within Federation borders. In 2254, new technology was installed just before the start of the Federation-Klingon War. During this outbreak, Starfleet Command made the hard choice to keep the Constitution-class ships off of the front lines, mainly as a unit of last resort. Both the USS Enterprise and USS Defiant were kept away from the fighting, which took a heavy toll on their crews. Under Captain Christopher Pike's command, the Enterprise was ordered to continue on its 5-year mission. In 2265, the Constitution-class line was refitted with modern technology. For example, the Enterprise was extensively refitted this year in preparation for her first 5-year mission under Captain James T. Kirk. Around this time, Kirk's Enterprise became the second known Federation ship ever to leave the galaxy. Following her return and repair, the knowledge learned would later be used in other Constitution-class starships in 2266. 2267 saw several Constitution-class ships gather at Starbase 11 for refitting repairs. Despite the success of a Constitution-class line, the missions the ship class found itself in often resulted in a high loss rate. For example, the class often operated in highly dangerous circumstances. In the late 2260s, many Constitution-class ships were lost. For example, in 2267, the USS Constellation was lost to what we refer to as the Doomsday Machine. Trek Central recently did a complete breakdown of his design. You can watch it via the link below. In 2268, the Vulcan-manned USS Intrepid was lost of all hands after a fatal encounter with a huge, simple cellular being in system Gamma 6A. Later in the same year, the USS Exeter was infected with an unknown virus, killing the entire crew, save for the captain. While the ship was undamaged, it was heavily contaminated and left adrift. In the later stages of 2268, the USS Excalibur, Hood, Lexington, and Potemkin all participated in the disastrous testing of the M5 Multitronic unit. In the later stages of 2268, the USS Excalibur, Hood, Lexington, and Potemkin all participated in the disastrous testing of the M5 Multitronic unit. This resulted in severe damage to the Excalibur, with all her crew lost in action. The Lexington also suffered damage but was still salvageable. Around this time, the USS Defiant would respond to a distress call from an unexplored sector, which the Folian Assembly had claimed. The Defiant would fall into the mirror universe following a battle between the Enterprise and 2 Folian ships. In the late 2270s, the Constitution-class starships would undergo a massive refit and redesign, which would later be known as the Constitution-2 class line. We shall cover that in the next video segment. Before we do, we currently know of the following Constitution-class starships in service to Starfleet. The USS Enterprise was destroyed in 2285. The USS Cayuga was destroyed by the Gorn in 2259. The USS Constellation was destroyed by the Doomsday Machine. The USS Defiant was lost in a spatial interface in 2268. The USS Excalibur was seemingly still active in 2384. The USS Exeter was abandoned in 2268. The USS Hood, the USS Intrepid was destroyed in 2268. The USS Lexington, the USS New Jersey was preserved at Starfleet's Fleet Museum, and the USS Potemkin was last known active in 2293. Of course, there have been multiple Constitution-class starships that have not been fully identified or confirmed as Constitution-class. For example, the USS Republic. This was a ship that James T. Kirk served on as an ensign in 2254. Many strongly believe that the Republic is a Constitution-class. As the Constitution-class USS Enterprise is such a famous design with a lot of history, we will keep this section brief. Matt Jeffries was responsible for designing what would become the original Constitution-class USS Enterprise. Originally, both Jeffries and Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry did not want the Starship design to look anything sort of like a rocket ship used by the aerospace industry, or in popular culture. Many designs were rejected for being too conventional. Because the Enterprise was to be flashing by on screens, Jeffries wanted the design to be very simple but immediately identifiable. During a visit, both Roddenberry and NBC staff were drawn to a sketch that would be the final configuration of a Constitution-class. Originally, Jeffries had made a small model of a ship and hung it upside down in his office, a design choice he had to unsell. The hull was kept smooth, with a sense that the components of the ship would be serviceable from the inside. The USS Enterprise was originally named Yorktown, but Roddenberry was fascinated with the aircraft carrier Enterprise and wanted to use that name. To this date, the Constitution-class line appears in every episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the original series, and the animated series, except for the episode of The Slaver Weapon. The class has appeared over 45 times in other Star Trek movies and series. Naturally, with a modern show requiring a modern design, the Constitution-class appears as a refreshed and modern design in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This is still the same ship as it appears in the original series, which is set after Strange New Worlds, but it is just visually updated for modern entertainment standards in the 21st century. In the early 2270s, Starfleet decided to completely refit the aging Constitution-class line of starships. While we know this as the Constitution-class, at the time of the introduction, it was simply known as the Constitution-class refit. It was conceived initially as a part of an 18-month redesign and refit under the direction of Captain William Decker and Commander Montgomery Scott. The refit of the USS Enterprise produced an almost totally new vessel. The massive overhaul replaced nearly all major systems, making very few officers fully rated in the new design. Even before the refit was actually complete, the Constitution-class USS Enterprise would continue to serve in a prominent position for Starfleet and the Federation. However, in the 2280s, the Enterprise was reassigned as a training vessel. During the Battle of the Mutara Nebula, in which the Enterprise under Admiral James T. Kirk engaged Khan, the refit Enterprise sustained critical damage. The battle between the Enterprise and the commandeered USS Reliant caused structural damage that would be costly to repair. With the dawn of a new age of starships, which will be led by the Excelsior-class USS Excelsior, Starfleet Command declined to refit the Enterprise, given the ship was well over 20 years old and saw that her day was over. By 2286, and following the destruction of the original USS Enterprise, at least 3 Constitution-class starships were in service, including the newly launched USS Enterprise A. The new Enterprise was launched from Space Dock 1 on the orders of the Federation Council, to show appreciation of Captain James T. Kirk and his crew's efforts to prevent the whale probe from devastating Earth. In the early 2290s, many new Constitution-class ships had been put into service. For example, a special task force of Constitution-class starships, including the USS Ahwahnee, USS Eagle, USS Emden, USS Endeavour, and Potemkin, were quickly assembled to take part in Operation Retrieve. This would see the rescue of James T. Kirk and Dr. Leonard McCoy from the Klingon penal colony of Ruapenthe. It seems that although Starfleet looked to the Excelsior-class as this new age, they were still building new Constitution-2 classes. This class line would live on in the 24th century. During the Battle of Wolf 359, which devastated a large portion of the Federation Starfleet, at least one Constitution-2 class starship took part in the engagement and was destroyed. Sources are conflicted on which ship this was. For a detailed breakdown of the Battle of Wolf 359, see our dedicated video here on the Trek Central channel. We know that the Constitution-2 class, USS Enterprise A, would be preserved at the Fleet Museum by 2401. Notably, the USS Potemkin was a refit Constitution class, much like the original USS Enterprise. The Constitution-2 class designation for the refit Constitution class first appeared in print in the USS Enterprise's Officer's Manual, written by Jeffrey Mandel and Doug Drexler. It concurrently appeared in the Star Trek Spaceflight Chronology, another reference book by Rick Sternbach, both of these released around the 1980s. It seemed the designation of a Constitution-2 class was in competition with the unofficial Enterprise-class designation. The Star Trek Picard series logs, which accompanied the 3rd season of the new Paramount Plus series, proposed that by the 25th century, the introduction of a Constitution-3 class, which we'll talk about in a minute, would mean that the refit Constitution-class ships had been retroactively reclassified as Constitution-2 class starships by Starfleet Command. Yes, I know that's confusing. The Constitution-2 class Enterprise A was a reuse of the refit Enterprise model built for Star Trek The Motion Picture. It was designed by Andrew Prober and Richard Taylor, particularly being based on Matt Jeffries and Mike Minor's initial design sketches for Star Trek Phase 2. Other artists also pitched in for the Constitution-2 class design, including Joe Jennings, Douglas Trumbull, and Harold Mickelson.
Your old command.
It's the only sway I've got.
It's the new refit Neo-Constitution-class.
The late 24th century introduced a new Constitution class, the Constitution-3 class of starships. It was commonly known as the Neo-Constitution-class, or, like its predecessors, just the Constitution-class. Not many ships of this class are known. However, with that said, we know that by the early 2400s, the USS Titan A, a Constitution-3 class starship, had already received an NCC commission and undergone a refit. It seems the Neo-Constitution directly results from the destruction of Utopia Planitia fleet yards. This resulted in the Titan A's space frame incorporating reused and recycled components, rather than replicating, from the previous lunar-class USS Titan, such as the nacelle shield mechanism and computer systems done at the fleet yards. Later in 2402, the Titan A was rechristened as the USS Enterprise G, to honour the command crew of the Galaxy-class USS Enterprise D and their actions in defeating the Borg during the Frontier Day takeover. At 560.5 meters, the Neo-Constitution-class followed the traditional saucer section engineering, section warp nacelle layout standard to most Starfleet vessels. The class was designed to be an exploration vessel, but also able to provide a close support envelope at sublight speeds. It could also offer support around densely populated solar systems, which also explains the overpowered impulse engines. System-wise, the Neo-Constitution-class was equipped with both deflector and metaphasic shields for defense, while armed with phaser arrays and torpedo launchers for offense. When breaking down the weapon systems, there were 7 phaser turrets, 4 phaser arrays, and 3 torpedo launchers. 2 fore, 1 aft. The Neo-Constitution-class could reach the maximum speed of warp 9.99 and typically had a crew complement of around 500 personnel. Currently, the only known ship in the Neo-Constitution-class line is the USS Titan A, which would later be renamed as the USS Enterprise G. Whether Starfleet would commission more of this class, or prefer to keep producing more modern inline designs such as the Sagan-class and the Odyssey-class is currently unknown. Design-wise, the Neo-Constitution-class was designed by veteran Star Trek designer Doug Drexler and Bill Krause, also known as Admiral Buck. Work on the design started in June 2021. The Neo-Constitution-class is essentially a refinement of Bill Krause's own 6-year-old Star Trek fan design, known as the Shangri-La-class. When you compare both, they are very similar. I'll leave this question while you're watching this video. Yes, another one I know. What do you think of the Neo-Constitution-class? Does it make sense in terms of a 25th century design language? Or should it just stay as the Shangri-La class for the 23rd century? Let us know what you think. Even though Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets had evolved since the time of the original Constitution class, the design name and style was still carried into the future. For example, in the 31st century, we can see Starfleet has a new Constitution class in operation. The class is not designated as a Mark IV or anything, but simply referred to as a Constitution class starship. For the sake of clarification in this video, and for not everyone getting confused, including our lovely video editor, we will refer to as the 31st century Constitution class. Like the predecessor design, it also comprised of a saucer section, a secondary hull, and 2 warp nacelles connected by pylons. Sources indicate the class measures around 1,399.82 meters in length, and could accommodate a crew of around 2,000 personnel. The class was active as early as the year 3060-90, and would still be active into the 33rd century. For example, in the 31st century, several of these ships were destroyed in the burn. The wrecked remains of this ship class is also spotted in 3188 above the planet Hema. In 3190, various 31st century Constitution class starships participate in the evacuation of Earth, when the dark matter anomaly threatened the planet. The ship was still in service during the 33rd century, when several starships participated in a ceremonial honor formation at the Federation headquarters, to launch the USS Discovery and Zora's Red Directive mission. Perhaps with the new Star Trek series of Star Trek Starfleet Academy, that in this era of the Star Trek universe, we might see more of a 31st century Constitution class starship design. Known starships include the USS Armstrong, USS Excalibur, and USS Noble. The 31st century Constitution class was designed by Ryan Denning. The class name of Constitution class comes from the updated 2nd edition of Star Trek Shipyards, Starfleet Ships, 2295 to the future. It's a reference book. This was released in August 2021 and highlighted the USS Armstrong. Originally, the Armstrong was slated to have a model of a design made. Prototypes were already made and produced. Unfortunately, the release never happened, as the company who were making the models, Eagle Moss Collections, went bankrupt in August 2022. In Star Trek Online, this starship class is referred to as a Kirk-class design. In the alternate reality known as the Kelvin timeline, the Constitution class was launched by Starfleet in the latter half of the 23rd century. The ship class has been active since at least 2255, as the USS Enterprise was built in Riverside, Iowa on Earth. The design of the Kelvin timeline Constitution class differed from the Prime timeline Constitution class we spoke about at the start of this video. The reason for this design change was due to the temporal incursion of Nero in 2233, which resulted in the destruction of the USS Kelvin. This event would change Starfleet's focus and also affected their shipbuilding plans, producing a different Constitution class USS Enterprise than we would see in the Prime timeline. The Enterprise would serve in a variety of tasks, but would only be placed in a 5-year mission in 2260. In 2263, the same year that the Kelvin Enterprise was destroyed, another Constitution class was undergoing construction at Starbase Yorktown. After the Enterprise crew saved the day, this new Constitution class was completed and christened the USS Enterprise A, and placed under the command of the original Enterprise crew as their new starship. Now, we could speculate that the Enterprise A is perhaps the Kelvin timeline version of the Constitution class refit. The previous official Starships collection has confirmed that the Enterprise A is in fact just a modified version of the Kelvin Constitution-class, so not a refit. The Kelvin Timeline Constitution-class was designed by Ryan Church, in which he based the design of the original Constitution-class design done by Matt Jeffries. The earliest designs of the new Enterprise were produced by Tim Flattery. The visuals then he produced were a bit too close to the familiar movie version of the Enterprise. Abrams and Scott Chambliss, the production designer, wanted to find a design that was less familiar. Church's designs impressed them both. Previously, Church had worked on both Star Wars and Avatar. The executives were very happy with Church's designs, and they were passed over to ILM, who started filling out details and making a simple computer model. At one point during the design, Alex Yeager suggested they should consider giving the Enterprise heavier panel lines. This would have made it look clunkier and given a more sense of scale. While ILM did produce these drawings, as seen on screen, the team decided to take a different approach. The obvious design difference from a modern Kelvin Timeline Enterprise is the bulbous nacelles. On the classic Enterprise, the nacelles had been a simpler shape. Ryan Church started to explore new shapes for the iconic feature. At the end of the concept design phase, Church had designed an Enterprise that was recognisably similar to Jeffries' Enterprise, but still had more sweeping organic lines and pronounced shapes. This included the nacelles, that I can only assume were inspired by the Planet Killer or Doomsday Machine, whichever you want to call it. The fact is, now I've said it, you're gonna see it, so you're welcome. While still sleek, the Enterprise had various raised sections along the hull, including cowling on the nacelles. There was also exaggerated separation lines on the engineering hull. The rear end of the ship was more swept back, allowing for a pronounced hull and shuttle bay. The VFX team went to great lengths to experiment with how the ship's nacelles could light up when the Enterprise was travelling at warp. Eventually, director J.J. Abrams was happy with the ship, and ILM produced a final version of the USS Enterprise for the Kelvin timeline. The multi-tone deflector dish had been added and a familiar Aztec pattern was placed on the ship. Today we're delving into the Constellation-class. It's a rather interesting class of Federation starship, a true Federation workhorse. While you've probably seen it around the Star Trek universe before, what do we really know about this ship? With everything from technical specifications, behind the scenes information, and a comprehensive in-universe history recap, this is your one-stop shop for all things Constellation-class. With a canon as expansive as Star Trek's, that leaves us with a hell of a lot of ground to cover. The Constellation-class was the definition of a workhorse, originating from the late 23rd century. It was active all the way into the mid-24th century. The ship was being prototyped as early as 2278 with the USS Constellation. We never got a proper look at that one, just seeing it as listed on mission assignment charts from the late 23rd century. Tensions with the Klingon Empire were at a high, with the Federation needing a fast and reliable ship for response and interception. In the latter half of the 23rd century, the Constellation-class was designed as that ship, to keep the Federation secure, able to respond quickly, and call in the cavalry if need be. However, thanks to the Kittimer Accords in 2293, the ship's mission statement needed to be redefined. This turned in a sort of a everyman ship going into the 24th century. They were used in everything from patrol, survey missions, and exploration. Constellation-class vessels, such as the USS Hathaway, constructed in 2285, were unique among their counterparts. Unlike other Starfleet vessels of the era, such as the Constitution-class and Excelsior-class, the Constellation-class was notable for the presence of 4 warp nacelles, as opposed to the usual 2. This allowed the ship to reach speeds to a maximum warp 9.2, and sustain them for longer than the average ship. The ships were also outfitted with at least 2 impulse reactors. With multiple separate shuttle bays, it's safe to assume that these ships were equipped with quite the fleet of shuttles, frequently used on surveying and crisis response missions while in active service. It makes sense that the ship would get a use out of them. As far as the interior is concerned, the main bridge was fairly standard, although it does seem that the Constellation-class ships had 2 bridge layouts. There's the one we see on the USS Stargazer, which is in tune with what we see in ships of the Constitution-class. Naturally, bridge designs do change over time, so it makes sense why it would look different later on. The bridge has all the usual fixtures that you'd expect from a Star Trek ship. View screen at the front, helm and navigator console side by side, and a captain's chair. There was a tactical station on the left wall, more monitors were stationed along the back, likely rounding at communications, science, and engineering. It also featured 2 turbolifts, helping a crew easily navigate around the ship's 15 decks. These 15 decks housed a crew that usually numbered around 350, although it could operate with a skeleton crew of just 40, and take a whopping 3,500 in the case of an emergency. That's quite a lot. The entrance to the captain's ready room was also located on the bridge. An interesting and notable omission from the bridge layout was the lack of a designated post for the ship's first officer. This indicated the ship's age and design style, as ships of the late 21st century did not typically have a dedicated seat for their first officer. This would be a problem that wouldn't be encountered by other Constellation-class ships, such as the layout seen on board the USS Hathaway. Beyond the first officer getting their own designated chair and console, the bridge was arranged in a way unlike most Federation starships. The helm and navigation consoles were actually along the sidewalls, providing a totally unobstructed look at the view screen. Other areas on the ship, such as the engineering section and the crew cabins, were typically of Federation starships of that era. Although, with the ship being in service for as long as they were, it's more plausible that there would be some small variations in layout and design between the Constellation-class ships. As mentioned, the crew complement of the Constellation-class was anywhere from 350 to 535 personnel, although a skeleton crew of 40 could keep the ship running if need be. With this crew, the Constellation-class ship would embark on frequent recon missions, backing up the Federation in numerous battles. Take for instance the USS Constance, registry NCC 10367, which was present at the Battle of Wolf 359. The Constance suffered critical damage, with it ultimately being declared lost in action on stardate 44002.3. Many ships were destroyed in this battle. However, this was notably the ship which Liam Shaw, later captain of the Titan A, would escape the battle from. This is a story he related to Picard himself during the third season of Star Trek Picard. Captain Shaw, can I tell them about the USS Constance?
No.
Fair enough. There was also the USS Hathaway, registry NCC 2593, launched from Luna in 2285. By the time we see it in the late 24th century, it was used for a simple battle simulation, with the ship stripped down to a shadow of its former glory. For the simulation, the Hathaway was commanded by William T. Riker, going in battle against the state-of-the-art Galaxy-class Enterprise D. This exercise was interrupted by a group of Ferengi, who misunderstood that it was an exercise, demanding the surrender of the Hathaway. Thanks to Riker and Picard's quick thinking, they faked the Hathaway's destruction using some photon torpedoes and a split-second warp jump. 3 years later, however, the Hathaway had been restored to full operational capacity. The ship was seen as part of a fleet that blockaded the Klingon-Romulan border during the Klingon Civil War. Calling the old ship into active duty for the mission exemplifies just how reliable the Constellation-class vessels were. This is further demonstrated by the USS Victory, registry NCC 9754. The Victory was mentioned a couple of times throughout Star Trek: The Next Generation. It rendezvoused with the Enterprise D in elementary dear data, and was seen during stellar nuclei population surveys on Starfleet operation charts. Beyond surveys and research, another common use of the Constellation-class ships, the Victory also fought on the battlefield in the Dominion War, reporting numerous casualties to command in 2374. Notably, this is also the ship Geordi LaForge served on before his time on the Enterprise D. Now, it's probably time to talk about the one you're here for. If there's a Constellation-class ship that you know, it's this one. The USS Stargazer, registry NCC 2893. According to Starfleet records, it entered service in 2326. As early as 2333, the famous Jean-Luc Picard served as a bridge officer. When the ship's captain and first officer were killed in action, Picard took command of the situation. His bravery was commended by Starfleet Command, who awarded him command of the Stargazer, a post he would hold for 22 years. With the Stargazer, Picard would go on all manner of missions, secret missions to the Fire of Calyx, the planet of Shalana, and even engaged in truce offerings during the Cardassian Wars, which saw the Stargazer fleeing with heavily damaged weapons and impulse engines. This was also the ship that Jack Crusher, husband to Beverly Crusher and father to Wesley Crusher, served on. He was close friends with Picard, and according to some sources, even served as the Stargazer's first officer for a time. Unfortunately, he was killed in an away mission in 2353. Just 2 short years later, the Stargazer was presumed destroyed in the Maxia Zeta system, in a battle known as the Battle of Maxia. The ship was attacked by an unknown vessel, later revealed as a Ferengi ship, leaving the Stargazer severely damaged. Thanks to the now famous Picard maneuver, the Stargazer was able to destroy the enemy ship. Despite the victory, the Stargazer was so severely damaged it had to be abandoned. Picard was court-martialed for the loss of the Stargazer, although he was eventually absolved. The wreckage of the Stargazer was salvaged by the Ferengi, who used it to trap Picard, forcing him to relive the battle as a form of revenge. After being rescued by Riker and the Ferengi defeated, the Stargazer was brought to Xendi Starbase 9. The legacy of the Stargazer was massive. A model was stored in the Quantum Archive at the Starfleet Archive Museum. By the 2400s, the USS Stargazer had been sent to the Fleet Museum at Anthem Prime, refurbished, restored, and sat proudly next to the Enterprise D. The USS Stargazer was succeeded by the Sagan-class USS Stargazer, which carried on the legacy of the name, as well as the Constellation's 4 nacelle legacy. While that is a suitable legacy off-screen, the story behind the ship's creation is pretty interesting too. Because the Constellation-class was actually created before the Next Generation even started filming. Since Picard's ready room on the Enterprise D is dressed with a desktop model of his previous command, this became a necessity early on. The ship was designed by Rick Sternbach and Andy Probert, who decided on using the 4-nacelle design to show it off as a fast science vessel. It was made, interestingly, through mixing original series Enterprise model kits and commercially available Enterprise refit kits in a practice known as kit bashing. This model had the registry number of NCC 7100, swapping around the number decals provided in the Enterprise kit. Although with no name, it was likely just a generic Constellation model that Picard owned. That's it for the desk model, although he did eventually construct a studio model for filming. Although this was only done after first unit photography, with both actors Will Wheaton and LeVar Burton calling it a Constitution. Obviously, this 4-nacelled vessel is not a Constitution. Thus, the Constellation name was only chosen due to how similar the names are, and thus it could easily be dubbed over. Originally, the Stargazer was planned to be a Constitution-class ship. This would have allowed the visual effects team from the Star Trek Next Generation to use the movie USS Enterprise A model. With the ships basically being obsolete in the 24th century, there was no need for a CGI model until the 2010s, with the exception of Michael Jan Friedman's officially licensed novel, Enigma. The cover for this book featured a CGI model of the Constellation-class, which was constructed by Doug Drexler. No further CGI models were created until the CGI remaster of The Next Generation, where some footage was missing and couldn't be upgraded to high definition. Therefore, the team were forced to create a CGI model for the episode Peak Performance, credited to Sean Jackson. Both of these models were built in lightweight 3D, the same software used to remaster the entirety of The Next Generation. The USS Enterprise is a pretty powerful ship in its many incarnations. Okay, maybe not the NX-01 Enterprise. I joke, that ship was powerful in some situations. When we get to the likes of the Galaxy-class USS Enterprise D, it's powerful, and easily make light work of most Star Trek species ships, unless they're an outdated Klingon bird of prey it seems. Anyway, how do you make that ship even more overpowered? Well, add a giant laser to it of course. While the Galaxy-class Starship was an iconic symbol of Starfleet in the 24th century, and even into the 25th century, an alternative future showed us what was possible if it was upgraded and made the exploration starship into a battleship that could take on multiple enemy starships at once. Today, we're talking about the Galaxy X Dreadnought class. Let's explore more. This is the Galaxy X class starship, which existed in an alternate timeline in the Star Trek universe, as shown in the Next Generation series finale, All Good Things. However, it also exists in the Star Trek Online, the MMO video game. I actually command one of these in-game in my personal fleet. Today we'll explore what makes this starship unique and how it fits into the Star Trek universe. Designed and launched from Utopia Planitia fleet yards, the Galaxy Dreadnought was initially built off of the frame of the iconic Galaxy-class starship and was active during the 2390s. It measured 641 meters in length, 463 meters in width, and featured 42 decks. Warp propulsion still worked as standard. However, the Galaxy Dreadnought could go to a sustained warp speed at a factor of 13, higher than the original class of starship, which could only maintain warp 9.6 for a few hours. It is unknown if this was the starship's top cruise speed, but as it can go to warp 13 sustainably, it could probably push a higher warp factor just for not that long. Speaking of faster than light propulsion, the Galaxy Dreadnought could be equipped with a quantum slipstream drive in the 25th century. This unique technology, while still experimental, allowed for faster propulsion. However, as with the original design, the slipstream can only be maintained for a short time before needing to stop and cool down. In the alternative timeline of All Good Things, due to the war with the Klingons, it is unknown whether Starfleet developed the quantum slipstream technology. The inclusion of the iconic third nacelle would be used for creating increased power lines and a more stabilized warp field. The nacelles had additional structures on top of them, and the pilots had fins on the outer curves. While an upgrade and a redesign of the original Galaxy-class starship, the Dreadnought version still retains some iconic features, such as the source of separation, which could aid evacuations and use unique attack tactics. While the original Galaxy-class would only use the source of separation in dire situations, such as an evacuation, the Dreadnought would use it better during combat. The ship would support multiple phaser banks and photon torpedoes, including aft torpedo launchers. Each launch tube was capable of firing at least 5 photon torpedoes simultaneously. The original Galaxy-class typically carried around 250 photon torpedoes. However, the Galaxy Dreadnought likely carried more and probably used quantum torpedoes, which were more common by the turn of the 25th century. An additional weapons array was fitted to the ship's dorsal hull, right next to the bridge section. This was a dual phaser cannon that complemented the other array of weaponry that the ship carried. One of the most prominent features on the Dreadnought Galaxy-class was the mounted phaser on the underside of the saucer section. Known as the Spinal Phaser Lance, it's a devastating weapon. Given that it's built into the structure, specifically the spine of a starship's hull, this weapon is attached fully and cannot be removed. It can fire a massive single phaser beam that is capable of penetrating even a Klingon attack ship. A cloaking device was typically installed on the Galaxy Dreadnought. Originally, the Federation was not allowed to use cloaking devices on starships, except for the US's Defiant in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. However, by the time of the Galaxy Dreadnought coming around, the Treaty of Elrond had been dissolved due to the Romulan Star Empire's dissolution and the Kitterum Accord's collapse in 2399. Therefore, the Federation was able to create and install their own homemade cloaking device on their starships, such as the Galaxy-class Dreadnought. Due to the versatility of a cloaking device designed by Starfleet, it could also be installed on other starships within the fleet. Defense-wise, the ship could be equipped with your standard Starfleet shield systems, which would be appropriate for the 25th century. Such shields could also include regenerative shielding. Some starships would feature the ability to produce an antimatter spread. This was the process of ejecting antimatter into a pyrotechnical display around the friendly starship, and it worked to confuse and disrupt enemy scanners. Additionally, the spread would disable any tractor beam that was locked on, allowing the ship to retreat if need be. Canon-wise, the only time the Dreadnought USS Enterprise D has appeared on screen is during Star Trek Next Generation series final, All Good Things. During a temporal event known as the Anti-Time Disruption, a future was shown that included the crew of the Enterprise D, all leading different lives. This was well before the series of Star Trek Picard even came about and showed us what the crew really did in the future. We even see the Enterprise D still active far into the future, though she had been changed a fair bit. The ship was not destroyed on Viridian 3, much like the actual Enterprise D had been, or rather would be. Timelines, am I right? The Enterprise D continued to serve as the United Federation of Planets flagship. However, the ship was scheduled for decommissioning 5 years before Picard saw this anti-time future. William T. Riker, now promoted to Admiral, would save his old ship and make it his flagship. Riker and the Enterprise D would be based at Starbase 247. The ship would be fully refitted with a third warp nacelle. Additionally, new technology was installed on the now aging Starship. A powerful phaser emitter, which was a Spinal Phaser Lance, was installed on the dorsal hull, and a cloaking device was also installed. Following Jean-Luc Picard's joining of the USS Passenger to investigate the anti-time anomaly, Admiral Riker realized that Picard would not listen. He took the Enterprise to intercept the underpowered medical starship. Arriving just in time, the Enterprise intercepted 2 Klingon battleships and successfully destroyed one of the attacking ships with the Enterprise's new phaser lance. Seeing their defeat, the other Klingon vessel retreated. The Enterprise then beamed the crew of the USS Passenger due to an impending warp core breach. Just as the crew, including Captain Beverly Picard, were beamed aboard, the Passenger was destroyed. Admiral Riker was insistent on returning to Federation space. However, Picard convinced him to travel to the Devron system and investigate the anomaly. The future Enterprise D would arrive in the system and watch the initial formation of the anomaly. However, it would be the last starship to be destroyed once the anomaly was sealed. Therefore, this prevented this ship from coming into existence in this timeline. Due to these events occurring in an alternative future, the Galaxy-class Dreadnought does not currently exist in the prime Star Trek timeline. However, Jean-Luc Picard is the only person who remembers the events of the anti-time eruption. Therefore, he would know the future version of the USS Enterprise D. In the prime timeline of the Star Trek universe, we know that the USS Enterprise D was destroyed at Viridian 3, and then later salvaged and repaired by Commodore Geordi LaForge. It also appears that Starfleet were in the process of phasing out the Galaxy-class line of ships in favour of the more modern Ross-class. The likely factor in this decision is the loss of so many Galaxy-class ships during the Dominion War, and the newer design of the Ross-class. We've done a full breakdown of a Ross-class starship here on the Trek Central channel, and if you want to learn why it's a newer design of a Galaxy, go watch that one and you can learn more. Now, we've never seen any advances to the Galaxy-class that would compare to the Dreadnought version. We can assume either he did not remember or chose not to mention it without risking the timeline changing. Let's not forget that the future where this ultimate Enterprise existed wasn't the best future for Picard or the galaxy as a whole. The Galaxy-class Dreadnought appears in Star Trek Online, the video game. The game's storyline takes place in the 25th century, so it has nothing to do with the baseline Star Trek canon. Yes, it bases its story on it, but it's always done its own thing compared to Star Trek Picard, which is also set in the 25th century. In 2399, at the turn of the 20th century, the Galaxy-class exploration cruiser was refitted after the collapse of the Kittimer Accords. In response to the increased hostility with the Klingon Empire, the newly refitted and redesigned Galaxy-class Dreadnought would carry a cloaking device and the devastating Spinal Lance weapon. They could also install cloaking devices after the collapse of the Romulan Star Empire caused by the Hobus supernova, which destroyed Romulus. Several versions of the Galaxy-class Dreadnought were also developed, including the Venture-class, the Monarch-class, and the Yamato-class, all with unique designs and taking lessons from the previous Galaxy-class legacy. Star Trek Online would also name the Galaxy-class Dreadnought the Devon-class and the Galaxy-X-class. However, this was only mentioned in the background materials. As such, these names are not canon for the TV show or Star Trek Online itself. If you want to fly the ship, you can still do so in-game, and it's well worth it. Star Trek Online acknowledgement of the Battle of Iridium 3 means the Enterprise D was officially destroyed, and therefore the Enterprise E succeeded her. Therefore, the actual Enterprise D Dreadnought Galaxy-class still does not exist in the game. The Enterprise namesake is given to the Odyssey-class Dreadnought, the USS Enterprise F. Also in Star Trek Online, vessels of the Galaxy X-class were used by the Terran Empire's Imperial Starfleet. These include the ISS Study, which led to Terran invasion of the Prime Universe. Originally, Andrew Probert designed the Galaxy-class Starship, while Herman Zimmerman supervised the interiors. Several key Star Trek creative people would have a hand in developing the Galaxy Dreadnought. However, we'll learn later that Andrew Probert was not the biggest fan. The Galaxy-class Dreadnought was first introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation's final All Good Things. The ship was created due to the final episode showing the future of the Star Trek universe. Jumping 25 years-ish in time means the creators needed to show the starships had evolved. During the design and planning of the final episode, visual effects supervisor Dan Curry suggested the team modify the existing model of the USS Enterprise by adding a third nacelle. Curry thought it should be obvious that the ship looked different and like it had been souped up to show the passing of time. Once Rick Berman and Peter Larson signed off on the design, Curry handed the concepts over to his colleague, Greg Jean. Curry asked Jean with making some additional modifications to the Enterprise D model at the time. The idea was to give the future Enterprise heavy weaponry. The first stop was to put a rather large cannon on the bottom of the starship. This would become the Spinal Laser Lance. As we mentioned earlier, the original design of the Galaxy-class Enterprise D, Andrew Probert, was not exactly the biggest fan of the Galaxy Dreadnought starship. One of the big irks of the ship design was the inclusion of a third nacelle. This being as typically in Star Trek, under Gene Roddenberry, starships are only supposed to have 2 nacelles to allow for warp travel. Therefore, the inclusion of a third nacelle goes against what the original creator envisioned. Also, Probert did not like sticking random fins on the ship. When seeing the Galaxy Dreadnought on screen for the first time, Andrew Probert's reaction was, and we quote, "What the fuck is that?" It kinda says it all when it comes to his opinions on the starship when you think about it and put it like that. Running the United Federation of Planets is hard work. During Star Trek's many adventures, we see multiple ships like the USS Enterprise and USS Voyager all going off to explore the final frontier. But what about infrastructure to keep Starfleet and the Federation safe and running? Well, that falls to another line of starships. Today, we take a look at the Parliament-class starship. These ships appear to be geared towards large, complex engineering projects. However, they could also perform other roles such as diplomatic missions. But how did this ship come about? Where does it fit into the timeline of the Star Trek universe? All that and more in today's Star Trek Starships breakdown. Let's go. The Parliament class had your standard Starfleet starship design layout. This consisted of a saucer section with 2 warp nacelles mounted on pylons to the lower aft sides. 2 primary impulse engines were on the aft section of the saucer. The secondary hull was made up of a front-facing navigation deflector array, which rested beneath the aft of the saucer and was attached to a saucer with a pair of curved pylons. The Parliament class could cruise at a warp speed of warp 7, with a maximum speed of warp 9. Warp drive is able to be fed into the impulse engines for extra power. A Parliament class starship came in at a length of 641 meters. In terms of tactical systems, the ship was armed with phaser beam arrays and photon torpedoes, and presumably either had quantum torpedoes installed or the ability to have them installed, like other starships active within the 2380s. Standard Starfleet deflector shields were installed for defense. Given the new design, the Parliament class possessed several features other ships did not. One example is fluidic processors that could self-replicate their silica. Additionally, the ship class had thermal mesh with a double lattice and titanium hull brackets.
Ooh, let's go look at their thermal mesh.
I bet it's a double lattice!
Double lattice!
Let's refocus on the ship's nacelles. These massive nacelles were large enough to feature windows and habitable sections. It meant the crew could operate within them, which was not typically the case on other Starfleet vessels. For example, if a nacelle was active, it normally meant the area was too harmful. With advancements in technology, perhaps new shielding had been installed to allow for the nacelles to be habitable and accessible when in use by the starship. The Parliament class had 11 decks. One of the most significant sections was the ship's main shuttle bay, which spanned decks 6 and 7, and allowed for at least 9 shuttlecraft and at least 18 Argo-type ground vehicles. These were stored on decks 5 and 7 and were adjacent to the shuttle bay. Typically, a Parliament-class starship would carry a complement of Type 6A shuttlecraft. In the USS Vancouver's case, her shuttlecraft were all named after neighbourhoods in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We could presume that this is the same for the US Toronto, another Parliament-class starship. The shuttle bay was adorned with the starship's name and the Starfleet Arrowhead insignia in a metallic gleaming Command Division red. If we look at the Master Systems display of the USS Vancouver, a Parliament-class ship, we can see other well-known locations, such as engineering and the bridge, are located in the typical positions as they were on other Starship classes within Starfleet. The Parliament-class starship design has been active in the early 2380s. However, it is possible the ship design was around and active within Starfleet prior to the 2380s, especially if we compare the Parliament to the California-class ship design. Another Starship class appears to have been active before the dawn of the 2380s. The Parliament-class design was considered newer compared to the Achilles-class. The first well-known Parliament-class ship is the USS Vancouver. The starship was active in the year 2380 when, under the command of Captain Wynne, it assisted the USS Cerritos in the demolition of the fifth moon of Mictus III, which was threatening the inhabitants of the planet with extinction. The mission was a success, but did have some issues along the way.
Implode the moon.
Yes, Captain.
You maniac! We just redid the floors!
Many of the crew of the Cerritos would work on board the Vancouver, where they were in awe of the superior Parliament-class design. A year later in 2381, the Cerritos was assigned to support the Vancouver during Captain Wynne's post-war trade negotiations with the Karama. Unfortunately, the Vancouver was rerouted last minute to the Hesperega system to evacuate a colony being threatened by something known as a, and get ready for this, brown hole. This forced the Cerritos' commanding officer, Captain Carol Freeman, to conduct the negotiations herself. In the same year, the Vancouver was taken over by a rogue program, Badgie. Thankfully, this was resolved.
Well, I'm gonna go to an empty dimension and create a universe now. Maybe hang out with the Q Continuum or check out the Black Mountain.
Following this, Vancouver was tasked with retrieving the ex-Starfleet civilian, Dr. Beverly Crusher. In 2381, the USS Toronto, another Parliament-class starship, was assigned alongside the Cerritos to support Admiral Vassay's mission of opening up negotiations for allowing Ferenginar to join the Federation. Given the advanced design of the Parliament class, we can presume the class of ship was active in the dawn of the 25th century. It was introduced in a similar time frame to the Akira, Saber and Steamrunner class, all which appear to have lasted into the early 2400s. In Star Trek Online, which is set in the 25th century, Parliament-class starships are still operational and registered as combined miracle worker ships, surveyors and cruisers. In the 2410s, the class of ship was still considered a state-of-the-art starship design. The configuration of a Parliament class made it ideal for demolition assignments, given that it could be equipped with a controlled gravimetric demolition console. This module enabled the ship class to damage or destroy physically large targets. The Parliament-class starship first appeared in Star Trek Lower Decks. Since first appearing in the Season 1 episode, Cupid's Air and Arrow, the ship has appeared in 4 other episodes. The most notable ship is of course the USS Vancouver. In the MMO video game, Star Trek Online, a Parliament-class ship is established as having took part in the Battle of Wolf 359. This would have been the USS Ibn Sina NCC 70532. Naturally, this is extended canon, so it's not full canon to the Star Trek universe. We recently did a full breakdown of a Battle of Wolf 359 with every ship known. Check out that video here on the Trek Central channel. I'm not too sure if a Parliament class could actually be there, as that would mean the Cerritos had to be a lot older than we presume it to be. What do you think of this? Overall, the design of a Parliament class flows together really well. In Star Trek Lower Decks, the ship really embodies a better ship than the Cerritos, which is not hard to do, but it seems a place that everyone wants to be rather than a California class. Unfortunately, we don't know much about who designed this ship. It appears in Star Trek Lower Decks, so all the credit for the design goes to the excellent animators and designers who work on that series. With the Lower Decks coming to an end, Season 5 is airing right now, and hopefully we'll know more about the ships of the series sometime soon. Star Trek's Galaxy-class design was one of the largest and most powerful Federation starship classes in service to the Federation. While designed for exploration, the Galaxy-class would see heavy action during the Dominion War, and remain in service for around 40 years. While we all remember the USS Enterprise D as one of the most famous Galaxy-class starships, how many of these were actually in service to the United Federation of Planets? During the late 2370s, the Galaxy-class USS Challenger was in service to the Federation Starfleet. Not much is known about the operational history of the Challenger. In 2378, the Starship was one of several vessels which would intercept a Borg transport conduit that carried the USS Voyager back to the Alpha Quadrant. We actually know more about the USS Challenger from an alternate timeline event. The Star Trek Voyager episode Timeless featured an alternate timeline created after the USS Voyager attempted to use a quantum slipstream drive. This did result in the ship crash landing and all hands were lost, apart from Chakotay and Harry Kim. In 2390, the two surviving crew members were going to attempt to change the timeline to ensure Voyager could collapse the slipstream and avert the disaster. Starfleet dispatched the USS Challenger under the command of Captain Joy de la Forge. While Chakotay and Harry Kim were attempting to conduct their plan aboard the Delta Flyer, the Challenger caught up and was able to inflict severe damage onto the small starship, which resulted in a warp core breach. Thankfully, Chakotay and Kim were able to send a message to the USS Voyager in the past and prevent the disaster. In Star Trek's expanded media, the non-canon novel, The Return, which was written by William Shatner, Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, there was actually a Galaxy-class starship, USS Challenger, that existed earlier in 2371. This starship was commanded by Captain Sim, a Vulcan, and was docked at Deep Space Nine. The ship was the scene of a fight between Jean-Luc Picard and the Borg assimilated James T. Kirk. Yes, the book is interesting. I have left a link in the video description if you'd like to read that one and any of the other novels we mentioned in today's video. In Star Trek Online, Joy de la Forge also commanded the USS Challenger in 2397. The starship was seen inside and around Space Dock 1. The Challenger takes an active role in the in-game mission Beyond the Nexus, which was added to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Star Trek The Next Generation. Another novel by the name Indistinguishable from Magic, written by David A. McEntee, has LaForge promoted to captain and assumed command of the USS Challenger in 2384. The previous commander of the Challenger was Captain Montgomery Scott, aka Scotty, who retired after the death of his first officer during a battle. The Challenger was also investing in the discovery of the NX-07 Intrepid, which had previously been assumed destroyed in 2162. The prototype of the Galaxy-class starship was the USS Galaxy, initially NX, then NCC 70637. The starship was presumed launched in the late 2350s, as the first Galaxy-class to roll off a production line. Not much is known about the ship's early operations. However, in 2367, the ship was the location of a Starfleet officer defection. Lieutenant Paul Hickman stole a Type 7 shuttlecraft from the Galaxy and deserted Starfleet. With the outbreak of the Dominion War, the USS Galaxy saw action in pivotal battles, including the First Battle of Chintoka and the Battle of Cardassia the following year. Even though the Galaxy sustained damage during the battles of the Dominion War, the starship would survive. In 2379, the USS Galaxy was assigned to Starfleet Battle Group Omega to engage the Riemann Warbird Scimitar. Before the battle group would see action against the Warbird, the Scimitar was destroyed in a battle with the USS Enterprise E. The USS Odyssey was a Galaxy-class starship in service during the 2370s. No exact launch date for the Odyssey is known. However, the starship was under the command of Captain Kyogi. During the 2370s, the Odyssey was assigned by Starfleet Command to patrol the Cardassian border due to the heightened tensions with the interstellar power. Following the Dominion's Jem'Hadar taking Commander Benjamin Sisko prisoner in the Gamma Quadrant, Starfleet rerouted the Odyssey to Deep Space Nine to provide support. With the Odyssey's arrival at DS9, Starfleet suspended all wormhole traffic. Under the command of Kyogi, and accompanied by several of DS9's senior staff, the Odyssey proceeded into the Gamma Quadrant to investigate the Jem'Hadar threat. During the operation into the Gamma Quadrant, the Galaxy-class Odyssey was accompanied by the runabouts, USS Mekong and USS Orinoco. Upon reaching the location where Commander Sisko is being held, the Odyssey and runabouts engaged 3 Jem'Hadar attack ships. Unfortunately, during the fierce battle, a severe weakness was discovered in the Galaxy-class Odyssey. The Jem'Hadar's phased Polaron beam weapons were quite powerful, resulting in the Odyssey's shields being ineffective in defending against them. Because of this, the Odyssey took significant damage from multiple direct hits. Realizing his defenses were compromised, Captain Kyogi ordered power to be directed from the shields into the phasers, in a desperate attempt to inflict more damage on the enemy. Following the recovery of Commander Sisko, the Starfleet ships attempted to withdraw from the engagement. Needing to make a point about their commitment to protecting their space, the Jem'Hadar made a suicide run at the Odyssey as the starship tried to retreat. In the run, the attack ship collided with the Odyssey's secondary hull, and the ship exploded within seconds due to severe damage. All hands were lost on board with the Odyssey. While the Odyssey and her crew were lost, the saving grace was that prior to her departure from Deep Space Nine, all civilians and non-essential personnel were offloaded onto the station. The destruction of the Odyssey became a cornerstone of the Dominion Cold War, but it also showed the Federation that the Dominion was a dangerous threat and it would require a different approach. One of the new approaches was to pull the USS Defiant out of storage and put on active duty to protect Deep Space Nine and the Bajoran wormhole. With the loss of the Odyssey, it marked one of the first times a Federation Galaxy-class was lost during combat with an enemy force. More Galaxy-class vessels would take part in the Dominion War. Presumably modifications were made to reinforce the shields against the phased Polaron beam weapons. The Odyssey name would later be taken up by the Odyssey-class line of starships, which were in service to the Federation by at least the 2380s. Of course, the most famous Galaxy-class was the USS Enterprise D. It was the 5th Federation starship to bear the name Enterprise. This Galaxy-class vessel was in service from 2363 to 2371 as a Federation flagship. The Enterprise D was built at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards, orbiting Mars in the Sol system. As one of the first Galaxy-class vessels, its construction was a massive undertaking involving thousands of people across multiple disciplines. Throughout her service, the Enterprise D would make first contact with many species. The Starship was also the first to conduct a high warp saucer separation, demonstrating the technology installed on the Starship. One of the Enterprise D's pivotal engagements was the Borg incursion in 2367. While attempting to stop the Borg, the Starship resulted in heavy damage, which was eventually repaired. Eventually, the Enterprise D met its end during a battle of Iridian III. The engagement with a Klingon bird of prey caused extensive damage to the Starship. Due to the bypassing of the shields, the ship's magnetic interlocks were ruptured, and attempts to repair them were in vain, as it did lead to a coolant leak. A warp core breach started, which was unable to be stopped. Commander Riker, who was in command of the Galaxy-class vessel, ordered an evacuation of the crew to the saucer section of the vessel. While attempting to escape, the explosion of the star drive section knocked the saucer section off course and forced it into the atmosphere of Iridian III. Thankfully, Lieutenant Commander Data managed to reroute power to the lateral thrusters and level out the saucer section, resulting in a crash landing with no loss of life and minimal injuries. For a time, the ship was unsalvageable, but Starfleet rescued the crew thanks to 3 starships. Due to the Prime Directive, the saucer section was eventually recovered from the planet's surface. Under the command of Commodore George LaForge, former chief engineer of the Enterprise D, the saucer section was transported to the Fleet Museum. LaForge spent 20 years restoring the Enterprise D to her original condition. He even used parts from the USS Syracuse to replace the long-destroyed secondary hull. In 2401, when the Borg took over Starfleet during Frontier Day, the rebuilt USS Enterprise D was revealed to her original crew by LaForge. It played a pivotal role in ensuring the Federation could be saved while defeating the Borg Queen and crushing her plans. Finally, the Enterprise D was retired to the Fleet Museum for one last time. As we mentioned, the Galaxy-class USS Syracuse, NCC 17744, resulted in the return of the Enterprise D to operation in 2401. It's not entirely known when the Syracuse was commissioned into Starfleet. But given personnel files, it's possible that the Syracuse was one of the original Galaxy-class starships commissioned. During the 24th century, Commodore George LaForge cannibalized and incorporated the star drive section of the Syracuse into the restoration of her fellow Galaxy-class ship, the Enterprise D. Before 2401, the Syracuse's star drive section was now joined with the recovered saucer section of the Enterprise D. When Jean-Luc Picard and his crew needed the ship to stop the Borg, the nacelles of the Syracuse still required work, and they even bore the name and a registry of their original ship. In 2372, the Galaxy-class USS Venture was in service to Starfleet. The Starship led a task force under the command of Admiral Huster to reinforce Deep Space Nine when a Klingon attack threatened it. It's not known who was commanding the vessel, but Commander Sisko knew them personally. The Venture visited Deep Space Nine once again in 2373. However, by 2374, the Starship was playing a pivotal role in the Dominion War. The Venture participated in Operation Return, in which she protected the flank of the USS Defiant. Following the Dominion's retreat from the space station, the Venture was one of the first ships to arrive at Deep Space Nine. Later that year, the Venture saw action as part of a Federation Alliance fleet that invaded the Chintoka system. It's not known if the Galaxy-class USS Venture survived the Dominion War, as by 2401, the Galaxy-class Venture was out of service. The Starship had been superseded by the Sovereign-class USS Venture. The Galaxy-class USS Yamato was a sister ship of the USS Enterprise D. Both were constructed in the early 2360s at Utopia Planitia fleet yards. In 2365, the Enterprise D encountered an unmanned reproduction of the Yamato, which had been recreated by an entity. Later in 2365, Captain Richard Mackenzie was the commander of the Yamato. The Galaxy-class vessel had been assigned to patrol the neutral zone in Sector 234. It seems there was a command shakeup, as the Yamato was later placed under the command of Captain Donald Varley. It was under Varley's command that the Yamato visited the planet Venus III, where an archaeological dig was underway by Dr. Ramsey. An Iconian device was brought on board the Yamato. The device's onboard research resulted in the discovery of an ancient star chart containing the location of Iconia. Captain Varley decided to take immediate action, taking the Yamato into the Romulan neutral zone to locate Iconia. This was an attempt to find and secure it before the Romulans could. During the journey to the presumed location of Iconia, the Yamato played hide and seek through several star systems, in an attempt to elude a Romulan cruiser tracking them. They were successful and arrived at Iconia. The Yamato received an Iconian software transmission and was unable to continue due to a computer system failure throughout the ship. Now, the Yamato crew discovered the software intrusion and attempted to fix it. This resulted in the deaths of 18 engineering personnel when the shuttle bay force field was shut down. With the ship compromised, the Yamato left Iconia to rendezvous with the Enterprise D. The Romulan warbird, Hakona, which was cloaked, detected the Yamato and copied the log transmissions to the Enterprise D. Once the Yamato was close to the Federation space, the Iconian software caused an antimatter containment failure. The magnetic seals around the antimatter chamber collapsed, and the computer would initiate an emergency release system to dump the Starship's supply of antimatter. The release was halted prematurely, with antimatter remaining within the ship reacting in an uncontrolled matter-antimatter mix. This resulted in a warp core breach. Unfortunately, the Enterprise D watched as the star drive section of the Yamato exploded, throwing the saucer section into space and slowly disintegrating, causing all hands to be lost with the ship's destruction. At least 3 starships are uncertain to be Galaxy-class vessels. Admiral J.P. Hansen commanded one of these ships before and during the Battle of Wolf 359. In Star Trek canon, there is no confirmation of what exact starship Hansen commanded. While not seen on screen, the script for the episode would state that Hansen's ship was a Galaxy-class vessel, though no name was given. In Star Trek Online, Hansen's ship is identified as the USS Columbia. In 2373, the USS Madison was a starship operated by Starfleet. The vessel was part of a fleet commanded by Vice Admiral Hayes that first intercepted a Borg cube in the Typhon sector. The Madison then followed the Borg cube to Earth before the Battle of Sector 001. While it does not appear on screen in a movie of Star Trek First Contact, the starship is mentioned in dialogue. The name of Madison was overheard among the radio chatter at the start of the battle.
96 dead, 22 wounded on the Lexington.
Commander Busby on the Madison.
The ship's class is not identified in the movie. However, according to the Deep Space Nine novels, The Big Game and The Long Night, the Madison was a Galaxy-class starship. The MMO video game of Star Trek Online also identified the Madison as a Galaxy-class starship with the registry of NCC 71808. Another starship, the USS Magellan, was operational in the 24th century. This ship was never identified in canon as to what class it was. However, in 2374, it was part of a Starfleet attack force before an Operation Return. The Star Trek Encyclopedia originally listed the Magellan as a Constellation-class starcruiser. Still, according to the USS Enterprise Owner's Workshop Manual, the Magellan was a Galaxy-class sister ship of the Enterprise D. Dialogue and footage for the Deep Space Nine episode, Sacrifice of the Angels, also supports this, as the USS Venture was previously established as a Galaxy-class ship. Throughout Star Trek, multiple unnamed Galaxy-class starships can be seen out and about. One example is 2 starships docked at Utopia Planitia fleet yards in 2371. In 2373, several ships would be part of the Second Fleet during the Second Battle of Deep Space Nine. During the Dominion War, Starbase 375 featured 3 Galaxy-class vessels gathered around the base in preparation for Operation Return. Did you know that Benjamin Sisko commanded a Galaxy-class starship? This was revealed in a series of novels set in the Star Trek extended media. During the Typhon Pact novel, Rough Beasts of the Empire, Sisko would assume command of the USS Robinson. Before Sisko would take command, the Robinson's captain and first officer were killed, leaving the ship with a serious crew problem. This then resulted in Sisko being appointed captain. In 2385, Sisko and the crew of the Robinson began a 2-year exploration mission of the Gamma Quadrant. The vessel had previously undertaken an exploration mission to the Gamma Quadrant in 2383. In 2001, the Deep Space Nine calendar depicted the Galaxy-class USS Ronald D. Moore, NCC 70564, Dr. Deep Space Nine. The ship was, of course, named after a writer of the same name. Star Trek's New Frontier series of novels sees a Galaxy-class starship being placed under the command of Captain Calhoun, following the loss of the Ambassador-class USS Excalibur. This Galaxy-class is called the USS Excalibur-A, with the A designation only previously seen with Kirk's USS Enterprise. Several Galaxy-class vessels have been mentioned in various books, video games, and comics. These include, but are not limited to, the USS Asgard, USS Breedlove, USS Cheyenne, USS Constitution, Dauntless, Devon, Hood, Phlox, Trident, and Victory. Okay everyone, thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button and let us know what you thought of this concept in the comments below. For now, I've been Captain Jack here on Trek Central. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.